I'm Craig DeRoche, the CEO of Family Policy Alliance and the CEO of Christians Engaged as well, where we mobilize Christians. At Family Policy Alliance, as you know, we have 40 state organizations that bring good ideas toward Washington, D.C. from the families, from communities, from counties, and from states, instead of the other way around, trying to solve things for 330 million people with a one-size-fits-all in Washington, D.C. One of our leaders is blazing a pathway, an extraordinary pathway, and he's become somewhat of a subject matter expert in our own movement on school choice, as people have called it, or school freedom, or really just educational freedom to us. But we have had some massive victories in the last couple of weeks, actually in the last months, several, as in more than 7 to 10 that I could talk. We're not going to talk about all of them. But if you're at home, if you're like my wife and I, you're saying, this sounds great. This sounds like what I've been asking for 30 years. Sounds like what my parents were asking for when they created the Department of Education in 1973 and pounded on the desk for 50 plus years. We have it available to us, but I don't understand what it means. So that's what this interview is about. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're not going to get all the way there because this is emerging, but we think it's important because the starting gun kind of went off. All the things we asked to do to be able to organize back and have the power in our communities and as parents over education is beginning to return to us. So it's time to show up. And I invite in Michael King, the president of Massachusetts Family Institute. He comes from a local church background, which is what we like. We organize through 50,000 churches, again, locally coming up. But he is a business leader. He's one of the biggest business and entrepreneurial minds we have in our stable. And Michael, it's just a privilege to be with you and to talk about the innovations that you're advancing there for the mission in Massachusetts. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, Craig, it's great to be with you and share about good things that are going on in Massachusetts.
Well, so here's the big news, right? That first of all, people thought the One Big Beautiful Bill was a budget, a spending bill. It's not. It's a policy bill, folks. We've been saying that to help you understand it. It doesn't matter how much money was in the bill. It's about what you spend the money on. And they said, we're not going to spend money on abortion anymore. That was a huge win for us. There were some losses, some massive losses in that bill too. But an underreported massive win was, again, a budget sets policy too. And in the federal government, it's not half, but it's a big part of K-12 education. And just like the liberals do, they can set their policy with the money. Tell us what's in the One Big Beautiful Bill, what we know so far that's in there about educational choice, Michael.
Yeah, so this is a great day for education freedom in our country. I believe it's the first time we've had any kind of federal school choice bill. So again, when we talk about the ECCA, when we talk about the Educational Choice for Children Act, we're talking about a federal education choice bill. Okay. And so a lot of people, might get confused because there's 35 states that have some kind of education freedom. I believe there's 17 states now that have universal school choice. The one in New England that has that is New Hampshire. And so Massachusetts, of course, we don't have any education freedom except for this ECCA. And as you know, Craig, the parliamentarian at the last minute when this was going through the Senate decided to pull the ECCA out of the Big Beautiful Bill. And because of some really wonderful work from organizations like Invest in Education and Senator Tim Scott and Bill Cassidy and others, we got this ECCA back in the Big Beautiful Bill. But unfortunately, it came with an opt-in that the governor has power now to say we're either going to let federal school choice into our states or not. So that's another really interesting strategy when it comes to how we're going to interact with our governors, especially now that we have gubernatorial races, this upcoming fall and next fall. So that'll be an interesting point to discuss. But on the ECCA, again, we want people to understand, look, you can give upwards of $1,700 for individual taxpayers. You can send that money directly to an SGO, a scholarship granting organization, like we work with the Children's Scholarship Fund, instead of sending that money to the IRS. So who wouldn't rather send money that you already owe in taxes to a scholarship granting organization that can go to a student to go to a school of their choice rather than the IRS? So this is very exciting for all 50 states. Again, it's going to depend on your governor to have some sort of school choice on a federal level.
So we have a that's more my memory doesn't go back far enough on this fight. People said it's obvious. If we can Rush Limbaugh, the late great Rush Limbaugh used to say that kids' brains full skulls full of mush. You know, that was his word. And I thought it was a good metaphor. Even liberals will tell you that men do not formally, get the risk reward figured out until they're 25, 26 years old. They can say that out loud. That's the science, but for some reason they can say a 13-year-old can make a permanent decision. This is different though, Michael. This affects blue states very positively, and this is part of the leadership of what I wanted people to say is, so what? The next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about action where you live, but as a precursor to that, give us a blue state perspective about what types of ideas this opens up and opportunities.
Yeah, so in blue states, I mean, this opens all kinds of opportunities for all kinds of education outside of the public school. If you want to go to the school of your choice, to a religious school, just down the street from you, but you haven't been able to afford it, this offers you a very good opportunity to go to that school. And in blue states, like I said, we're going to have to convince governors. Look, in the Hispanic world and Hispanic demographic and the African American demographic, this is they love school choice. And, many of those voters are Democrats. And so, I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out with governors where school choice is a tough issue for them. There's a lot of Democrats that like school choice. So it's going to be interesting to see how governors react. And, this is going to start January 1st, 2027. So there's about a year and a half now where governors are going to have to decide how they're going to deal with this. Now you're going to have to deal with the teachers unions on this, right? Because they want to protect public schools. So this is going to be probably one of the most interesting fights, the political fights in the next year and a half. And I believe every family policy council in the 40 different states should really take advantage of this and bring in all kinds of new people into our tent under the tent of education freedom.
When I was hired as the CEO of the National Hosting Organization, that's what we are. We're the hosting organization. We don't tell these groups what to do. We lead locally. We support federalism. We believe in state sovereignty as a movement. We think that's where the ideas come from. And we think that the education system itself needs to be revolutionized. It needs to be restored in the power. Michael and his peers are out there doing that. What has changed this month, the so what of this interview, is that if Michael and I told you to get involved in an FPC in Michigan, if you want to call us purple, actually, we're pretty red these days. Blue state like Massachusetts. Can I do something? The stage has changed in a month. Several things are different. In America, the ACLU would be able to fight you for 11 to 20 years if you said, I want to do it in God we trust in your K-12 school. They can't even, their case will be dismissed now. Instantly in America, you're allowed to bring religion into the K-12 schools. The Supreme Court has settled that, folks. You are allowed to release time. I'm not going to even say what that is. I'm going to let you explain that, Michael. During class hours, full on Christian education. You are allowed to opt your children out of this perverse training to go to these crazy sex parties that we're hearing about in civil trials. Folks, we don't want our kids trained into that in the K-12 school system. They don't have time or the money to be doing that. You can now opt out of that. There are so many things that are happening to undo the 50 years of damage, but you need to get involved today. And so, Michael, you're one of the leaders that can help people understand there's 3 ways in which they can be involved in changing the world for the better. Whether you have kids or not in the K-12 school system, tell them about the 3 ways that the world is changing for the better and how they could be involved in that if they signed up for their FPC.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. So when we look at education here in Massachusetts, like you said, we look at it 3 ways. The first way is we look at the opt-out of sex ed. In Massachusetts, we've had an opt-out of sex ed movement going on for the past 3 or 4 years. Started in Worcester, Massachusetts. We had 4,000 K-12 students opt out of sex ed just in Worcester Public Schools, the second largest school system in all of New England. That's almost 20% of the school system, K-12, opted out of sex ed. And now we have the Mahmoud versus Taylor Supreme Court decision that came out of Maryland, where now parents are even more empowered to opt out of things that they find to be religiously objective, which again is a really interesting ruling and has a broad sweep to it. Because we're not only talking perhaps about gender idea, I mean, we're definitely talking about gender ideology and sex ed, but we could also be talking about things like evolution. Now, that's really interesting when it comes to a religious objection to what's being taught in our public schools. So, talk about empowerment of parental rights, empowerment of religious liberty. When we look at the Mahmoud versus Taylor decision recently. So again, the first part is this opt-out, making parents aware of what's going on in your public school. And as parents become aware, at least in Massachusetts, we've seen them leaving the public school. We've seen a public school exit across the country. So then we say, well, we can't only show the problem, we got to provide a solution. So in Massachusetts, we provided church-based learning centers. These are not schools. These are basically expansions of traditional homeschool co-ops that instead of happening once a day, they're happening 3, 4, 5 times a week. They are ministries of the church. And we want to empower every church in Massachusetts and across the country. You mentioned 50,000 of them. We want to empower them all to see K-12 as a ministry of the church. It is time that our kids spend 40 hours in our churches as opposed to 40 hours in our government schools per week. And so we now have 24 church-based learning centers.
To what he just said, it's our job. There's a burning fire going on in our culture, and we can go there with our water right now, which is the word. Keep going, Mike. You're getting me excited. I want to sign up again. My wife and I live in Michigan. I might sign up in Massachusetts.
There you go.
Yeah. Our Michigan FEC is doing this too. Keep going. We're talking about the opt-out folks is getting 4,000 families. Michael, I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but everybody listening to this is saying, yeah, but the church stinks. They don't actually get involved in anything. Pastors don't actually preach on it. Christians don't actually participate. And you just said, you know what? The church doesn't stink. Pastors preach on it and parents participate beyond anything else. That's why I had you on I just want to interrupt you, folks. If you want to know why we're having this conversation right now and you're wondering why you're feeling those bumps in your body right now, getting excited, God is moving right here. And he has a role for you to play in helping Michael. Where do we take it beyond the
Yeah, well, look, I mean, Craig, you know as well as I do the scripture where Jesus says, if you let one of these little ones fall into sin, better have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown in the bottom of the sea, right? I mean, this is the verse I give every time I've spoken in over 200 churches in Massachusetts, and I show, 70 slides, and so many of them are what's being taught, pictures of what's being taught in our public schools. You got the genderbread person that says sex and gender are not related to each other, that your sex comes from your anatomy and your gender comes from your brain. I mean, this is so crazy.
And equivalent of having the heroin dealer come in and teach kids how to mix speedballs with cocaine and heroin in our schools, and people are like, "What's wrong with that?" I don't see it.
And your kid loses their faith in the public school, and you're like, "What happened?" Right? I mean, this. So it's time that we take back the institution of education. We never should have outsourced it to the government. 70% of our kids in the churches, if not more, are still attending our public schools. And we understand all the reasons for that. And so, look, it's not like our public schools are going to end tomorrow. So we're just saying, look, we want to create an alternative. We've helped to create 24 church-based learning centers serving almost 1,000 children. We can do K-12 education in Massachusetts 5 days a week for as low as $100 a month. We've created our own education freedom ecosystem. We get scholarships from the Children's Scholarship Fund, which is one of the largest scholarship granting organizations in the nation. We get free tutoring, free training of tutors and proctors from the Herzog Foundation. The Herzog Foundation is a $350 million Christian education foundation dedicated to training up the next generation of Christian educators. So again, if we can create an education freedom ecosystem in Massachusetts, of all places, that is volunteer-based, that is parent-directed, that does not involve government money, right? I mean, this is something that everybody on the spectrum of education freedom loves. Even our friends are the homeschool, fundamentalists, or however we want to describe them on one side that don't want education freedom. And, it's not taking government, they don't want to take government money. We understand those concerns, but we're just saying it can be done either way. We can do it through the church and everybody wins, but obviously we want to see more education freedom. We want to see the ECCA, and even all of our friends that disagree on education freedom can agree on the ECCA because it's not going into the government. It's actually going from your personal checkbook that you would have written to the IRS, and it's going directly to an SGO. It's not going through the IRS. It's going from your check. It's like you're writing a check directly to the scholarship granting organization, and then that organization, helps a child go to the school of their choice. So we're creating education options through church-based learning centers. We're exposing the nonsense in the public schools. And then because the public schools still exist, we need to get the power back. So school committees, we call them school committees here in Massachusetts. They're called school boards everywhere else.
Boards everywhere else, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But what we're doing here in Massachusetts, we're very excited about. We had a school committee recently in Dighton, Rehoboth, get this, pass a safety in girls sports policy. Yes, that happened in Massachusetts, 10-0. The policy actually says that the coach and the players can forfeit a game if there's a boy on the other team, and there's no penalty to the coach or the girls for doing that. So it's empowered them. So again, passed 10-0 unanimously. They followed through the last fall, forfeited 2 games against Somerset Berkeley. Somerset Berkeley happened to go on to win the championship because, of course, there was a boy on the team that happened to be, I think, maybe the MVP of the championship series. But besides all of it,
Being the cheer of the hero.
That's right. So Riley Gaines came out actually and tweeted about this policy and said, if everybody passes policy, if every school board passes policy, then we'd forfeit all these games, and then parents would be forced to get involved because nobody's playing anymore, right? So we think this policy could be great. I mean, we already have a lawsuit against the NCAA right now regarding the whole Leah Thomas stuff, and so we're excited about that. The Supreme Court's taking up cases on this. So before we even need to get to this place on the school committee level, we might have already won this fight. But look, we're fighting it on all different fronts. And so policy is a big deal. We're giving legal advice to our school committees. We're trying to set up a fund now in New England so we can partner with attorneys to give legal advice to school committees. So anyway, there's a big fight to be fought at the school committee level. And even in Massachusetts, we're having success.
Folks, I'm going to say some hard things here because I want you to hear them. Michael King and what Massachusetts Family Institute are doing are why we exist. Because everybody counts. Because our kids are worth it. Because there's little Craig DeRoches out there that between 7th grade and 9th grade, all I did was graduate from alcohol and weed to harder drugs and more sex. Because he was changing my education environment, the things that I was exposed to. They weren't bringing the word in. Things were not available today that we can do in Massachusetts and Michigan, where you live, in Hawaii, California today. And that's what I want to shift to now. That's why we're having this conversation, folks. And I want you to have that sense of urgency. This is not something we're going to try to do 30 years from now. We've been given the right in our country by our Congress, by our president, and by our Supreme Court today to do these things now. And as I just said, our kids are rapidly learning. As the great theologian Bob Dylan said, you're going to serve somebody, right? And which one do we want them to have more of? That can begin today, but you have to have a sense of urgency as you hear our voices, Michael King, Massachusetts Family Institute, and I, Family Policy Alliance, the national host, to say there are 40 organizations doing this with 50,000 churches because we can do it today. If you're not currently working with one of the family policy councils, stop what you're doing when you arrive safely from where you're driving and sign up for them. Get on their donor list. If you don't have money, give your time to them. This is where the change is going to come. You can be the hands and feet of Jesus in something that people will talk about 50, 100, 250 years from now. When they're saying at our 250th year anniversary, they realized that the devil had taken education away from parents and they made a change. And that's why at 500-year anniversary, we have a remarkably different country because we fought and we kept it. That's what the invitation is to do. Michael, tell us about your hope, what you're seeing with this invigorated, deep blue, like don't even bother trying to be a Republican in Massachusetts, but you just said 4,000 families in Worcester, little Worcester. Tell us what you're seeing, and are you inspired? What's possible?
Yeah, so in Massachusetts, we have the Massachusetts Informed Parents Facebook page. We have about 15,000 members now. We're developing the Massachusetts Parents Unite Alliance. We have over 140 parents from 100 different towns and cities that meet quarterly. We are seeing more and more parents. You probably saw the Burlington parent situation where the Burlington schools gave a completely inappropriate, sexually inappropriate surveyed as sixth graders when the parents had already opted out. We filed federal complaints for these parents, working with the Office of Civil Rights. And so much momentum here in Massachusetts with parents. Like you said, 4,000 kids opting out of sex ed in 1 year in Worcester. And that trend continues. There's over 70 towns and cities that have some kind of opt-out movement now in Massachusetts. 2 years ago, we had 1,000 kids leave the Worcester public schools looking for alternatives. We've seen massive growth in homeschooling here in Massachusetts. And now, with the things like the ECCA, I mean, look, we have a governor that is very influenced by the teachers' unions. But look, if we can get ECCA, or Educational Choice for Children Act, here in Massachusetts, that is going to provide the opportunity for kids that could never have afforded to go to the school of their choice. Really, I mean, so many people say, well, we're not going to do school choice because it's just not possible. It's not there. It's going to cost our schools too much money. Well, that's not the case. This is all federal money. It's not going to cost your schools anything to get involved in the ECCA. So you no longer have that excuse. You no longer have the excuse that no federal program exists. Now the pressure is on. And so, there is just so much to be encouraged by. And I always tell people, if it can happen in Massachusetts, it can happen anywhere. And look, you'll appreciate this. I mean, organizations like Gateways to Better Education, if you're not familiar with them, people should get familiar with them. They do an audit of your frameworks. They found that in the Massachusetts frameworks currently, you can explicitly teach the Bible. You can explicitly teach the Bible in your public school. We have a Bible club in the South Shore, has 150 students in the Bible club.
Outside of Boston, right?
Yeah, just outside of Boston. So we've been working. We had a Bible club in Tingsboro recently, just north of Boston. They got completely canceled. It was a charter school, got completely canceled. We sent them a kind, persuasive legal letter saying, look, you're completely violating the First Amendment rights of this student. The very next day after getting our letter, they're like, please start your Bible club at the school. So we're seeing, I've asked our staff, I said, what's in the water here in Massachusetts? I've never seen so many Bible clubs starting here in our state. So just to see that, to see organizations like LifeWise, who are doing the early release program.
Early release, which we're not going to be able to talk about that today, and I wanted to. Folks, what's coming next, too, is full on the good stuff. Christian education in the church, not in the school, but physically taking our public students on a field trip, sometimes once a month, quarter, some even every other week or something like that, where they go and get Christian education during hours. What I wanted us to do was, Michael, I think we've done it. We wanted to get our audience excited about this One Big Beautiful bill, because it is not just about the money this year. We take that very seriously at Family Policy Alliance, but what we take more seriously is what we spend the money on. In America, we have come to the conclusion that it is being used to perpetuate evil, not just bad ideas, not just ill-informed or unintended consequences, as people say, but actually to harm our children and to direct them into a life of slavery away from our Lord and dependent on these weird sexual, drug, and other choices that they can capture them into before they can develop their own sense of self. And we believe that sense of self should be formed with the word and our purpose in Christ. And we want those seeds to find the rich soil, not be swept off of the road. And that's what this discussion is about. If you want to be a part of that, we don't think that there's been many times in American history like this, where you can see the revolution coming. We want you to raise your hand. We want you to say, put me in, coach, to Michael King at Massachusetts Family Institute and with his peers. If you guys are good enough at math, because the public schools were performing better when you and I went through them. We know that 40 state organizations in a 50-state country means that we have work to do. If you're in one of the 10 states that we don't have a Massachusetts Family Institute, we need you to raise your hand. Say, put me in, coach, in Illinois, Mississippi, Utah, right, Michael? Who was some of the other ones I'm thinking of?
Vermont.
Vermont, for crying out loud. Michael will help you. You get to work with Michael if you can help us grow in Vermont. Help us. Folks, there's never been an opportunity to take back control of the country, the school district, and the state we already own. We just have to show up and be good stewards of those resources. That's why we're mobilizing millions of Christians to vote in a way that we don't care which party wins in Massachusetts, but we want the Christian, our faith, to be represented well in that government. And we're well on our way to doing that because of the leadership of Michael King and the team at Massachusetts Family. If you're not already a member of their club, sign up, donate money to them today. Michael, it's been a gift to have you with us today, educating people more on school freedom. Thank you.
Yeah, Craig, my pleasure, and look forward to seeing you soon.